Okay, now let's keep going. And we're just getting started. We're almost through the intro. Now I want to talk about framing, naming, release valves, structure, anticipation, gratitude, good news, and the Louis Kahn question. So, the next section, once again, framing, naming, release valve, structure, anticipation, gratitude, good news, and the Kahn question. First, framing. I have a friend named Dudley. He's a very, very good writer, and he's a very, very good editor. And years ago, I wrote a novel called Millones Cojones. You can get it on my site, and robbell.com. And I sent him the novel, knowing, I think he even has like a doctorate or something in novel writing, and that he's written a number of novels, knowing that this man knows novels. And he actually edits books for his job. So he just knows books, and he specifically knows novels. And I knew that if he'd read my novel, he'd give me honest feedback, because that's what you want. And he said the most interesting thing. He read the novel, and then he said that he knew within a couple of pages that he was in good hands. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, when I, as an editor, read a book, I am going to read it as an editor, which means I'm seeing all the flaws. I'm distracted by everything that's not right structurally. This character isn't believable. This plot point is convoluted. He said, when I approach a book, I have this editor hat that I'm generally wearing. But he says, sometimes I read something and I can take that editor hat off because I know I'm in good hands and I can just let the story carry me along. So framing is the work that you do in a talk to frame it in order to let people know they're in good hands. So there's a couple dimensions to this. One of them's naming, one of them's release valves. And sometimes it's just a gesture. Sometimes it's just a word. Sometimes it's just three things that you say up front. I saw one of my favorite bands ever is Blur, this absolutely iconic British band, and they played the Hollywood Bowl near my house 2 years ago. And I had sort of pictured Damon Albarn, the singer, as sort of a grouchy, brilliant genius, super genius. So I didn't really know what to expect about the Blur live show. He's the lead singer of Blur. Also, he's the Gorillaz dude, and the Good, the Bad, and the Queen. He's just a virtuoso. But what was so interesting is they came out on stage, and the first thing Damon Albarn does is he walks right to the front of the stage of the Hollywood Bowl. That's like 17,000 people outdoors. He walks right to the front of the stage and he says to the crowd, "Good evening. We're so thrilled to be here. We're so glad that you're here. We hope you have a wonderful evening." Now, that's like the most basic thing you could say, right? But somehow it had like this beautiful, charming, humble, engaging effect. It was almost like just that gesture of, we're so thrilled that you're here. We're so thrilled to be here. We hope you have a wonderful evening. Sometimes it's just subtle, obvious gestures like that. Sometimes even, I've heard communicators just say, "It is such an honor to talk to you today." And it just does something. It frames the entire experience. Something as simple as an expression of gratitude, an expression of honor, an expression of privilege, sometimes an expression of excitement, like this thing that we're going to do together. It has done so much to me. And now the thought that I could share it with you, and maybe it might even do something with you, that is just the best. Something sometimes as simple as that. What are the framing things? So then the questions you ask simply is, how do you feel about this talk you're going to give? Going back, of course, to the you are the medium. There's a resentment, anger, bitterness. But now let's flip it around. Is there joy? Is there, I can't believe I get to do this? People, if they've come to hear you talk, They left their house. That alone is remarkable. They're not in front of a screen. They may have had to get babysitter. They may have taken time off work. They may have worked a full day. And now they're giving you an hour. They may have worked all week, and the one morning when they could just sleep in and not get up and go somewhere, they got up and went somewhere, which was to hear you. Do you see how your understanding of framing is shaped by just flying a little bit higher? It's almost like you stand outside of yourself and you look at the thing and you name what it is. And then you go, well, what does that provoke in me? That provokes wonder, awe, amazement, joy, privilege. I'm thrilled. Just those sorts of small, subtle framing. I remember 2014, the fall of 2014, I did a tour an arena tour with Oprah. And that's Oprah Winfrey. Oh my word, that joke works every time. Oprah Winfrey. And we did this tour of NBA arenas. And so Oprah spoke Friday night, and then the first speaker Saturday morning, Oprah was like the host, was Deepak Chopra, followed by Elizabeth Eat, Pray, Love Gilbert, followed by me. And needless to say, I am not perhaps the target demographic of the event. Is that safe to say? And I remember thinking, wow, this is probably going to be an arena full of people who have never heard of me and who are like, what, a former Christian megachurch pastor from the Midwest? Seriously, it's time for Starbucks. Do you know what I mean? And by that point, they've heard Oprah, Deepak Chopra, and Elizabeth. You're following Elizabeth Gilbert. Are you kidding me? And by the way, her talk was just amazing. And I remember thinking, okay, how do I frame my talk? How do I begin in such a way that I will remove as many obstacles as possible to actually connecting in some way? Almost like, think about this. What are the reasons not to listen to you that your audience may be holding in their hands? And then how can you take them out of their hands? So one example would be, people are like, yeah, but this person's too young, or this person's too old. Do you need to say something about that? This person why would I listen to this person? They're not an expert in anything. So how can you establish, not that you're, I'm an expert, don't do that, or maybe you should, but what can I say up front to take those objections out of their hands so we might be able to connect? So maybe up front you tell them about your divorce, your parents' divorce, the abuse. Maybe you tell them, I had this experience where my best friend died of cancer and I sat with her in the hospital through the night and we had this conversation. That was the last conversation we had, and she died in the morning. And so today I want to talk to you about last conversations, because in that last conversation, it somehow opened something within me that changed my whole life. A very heavy way to open a talk, but nevertheless, every person in the room is like, okay, I'm listening. That's like a framing. That's framing. So I remember thinking, man, how do I get from 0 to 60 as fast as possible in my intro to Oprah's audience? And around that time, I had noticed candidates' concession speeches, that there would be a candidate that would lose the election, and then the candidates traditionally give a concession speech. And that when the candidate stands up to give the concession speech, who generally stands right behind them? Their family. And I was struck on a number of times when there was somebody giving their speech and I had seen their family standing behind them, sometimes wiping tears because it had been a tough campaign, whatever. And I remember a number of times thinking, oh, they're human. Having that thought, like, oh yeah, you're right. They're not just a politician. They're not just somebody spouting a party line running for office. They actually have like family, and they have a spouse, and they have kids, and there's actually a family here that went through a campaign. And that must have been brutal. I can't imagine what they're all feeling. And there's a number of times when there's somebody that I didn't care for, that I didn't vote for, that when they gave their concession speech, I honestly found myself thinking, well, they're not that bad. Just seeing them personalized with the family. And then secondly, what do concession speeches? Oftentimes, what does the politician begin by doing? They begin by congratulating their adversary on their adversary's victory. They say something nice about their opponent. And what does it do? It humanizes them. And so I was thinking, what can I learn from that? How can I humanize myself? So I walked out, got introduced, and I would say, hi, my name's Rob. My wife, Kristen, and I recently celebrated 21 years of marriage. And sometimes literally the crowd would start cheering, and I would say, I married way over my head. I married up a division. How many of you men, and there'd be like 9 men in the arena. I'd say like, how many of you men know what I'm talking about? And the 9 men would raise their hand. Like, I know what it's like to marry out of my league. And I said, oh, by the way, I'm glad you raised your hands quickly, because the speed with which you raise your hand is directly proportional to the length of the ride home, which is a weird joke, but it worked in every city. And then I said, now my wife, Kristen, and I, we have 3 kids. We have an 18-year-old son. We have a 16-year-old son. And then we took a 9-year break. And then we have, at that time, I guess they would have been 16, 14. And then we took a 9-year break. And then we have a 5-year-old girl with long blonde hair. That was my intro. And that's like, 30 seconds? In 30 seconds, we managed to frame, I'm a dude who loves his wife, who has great respect for her, who is celebrating a number of years of love and fidelity. We have these kids I absolutely adore. I've told you a number of things about myself that make me human. So if you're like sitting there with arms folded thinking, what is some former megachurch Christian, whatever guy, you're saying like, well, there's a dude there's always the chance that you're going to give me an extra couple minutes. And then I charged in to, and then I began the talk by telling about my older son's birth in 1998, and then the death of my beloved grandmother in 2008. And obviously a story about how much I love my grandmother and the night that she died on my birthday. And this guy loves his grandmother. Now, the beautiful thing is it's all true. So here's the key thing about framing. Always, always, always the truth. Always. And so when you're thinking, what do I need to say on the front end of this communication to frame it and establish who I am, what this is about? Now, a couple weeks ago, I did a set in a comedy club in between a bunch of comedians. The club was like, we want you do your thing in between all these comedians. And they only introduced me by the way, I was so nervous. Oh man. They only introduced me as, this is Rob and he's not a comedian. I think they might have said he's an author. He's not a comedian, he's an author. That was the intro. That's a brutal intro because people are, and I realized that half of the set, people were like wondering, who is this guy? What are you doing? And it started to work towards the end a little bit, but man. And I walked off stage thinking, oh, if you don't get framed properly, then you need to frame it yourself. And those of you who have communicated, I can bet you've had times when you weren't framed properly and you didn't think to frame it properly, and half the battle, or the reason why it didn't go well in your estimation, is because it wasn't framed up top. So even just saying, I was so honored when so-and-so invited me to come talk about X. Now what you've just done, and it's true, once again, it has to be true. I can't stress that enough. Exaggerating like little white lies, we have no place for that. It has to be true. But even just framing, I was so thrilled when so-and-so asked me to come talk about X. What that frames is the people who you're here, so you must have trusted whoever organized this thing. The people that you trust asked me to do this. I'm doing this in response to a request. Can you see at a profound level how that shifts things? Because the person who's sitting there going, who's this knucklehead? Why would I listen to her? Oh, the people who organized this thing that I came to. So I have some level of confidence or trust or respect for them. They think there's something about this person I should hear. Can you see how that alone may cause somebody to unfold their arms? So framing, and then sometimes with a particular topic, the framing is everything. Now, today I'm going to talk about this, and I know for some of you, there are few topics more boring than this subject. Or for some of you, this topic is responsible for so much bloodshed, pain, and anguish. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how we can transform our thinking on this topic so it's not such a source of pain, anguish, and heartbreak. Do you see what you just did there with this framing? So that leads me to the next thing. The question is, what's in the room that needs to be addressed, that if it doesn't get addressed, my communication here is going to suffer? So maybe you're filling in for someone and it hasn't been clear why they're not there. Excellent time to say something about that. Maybe there's something happening in the greater world, a terrorist attack, the death of somebody. Maybe there's something happening with the weather, with the whatever the organization is or the group that you're speaking to. Maybe there's something that's happened in the communal life. And if you ignore it, everybody's like, why aren't they talking about it? Why aren't they mentioning it? So sometimes just saying, I realize that X is going on. And actually next week we're going to talk about that. But today we're going to talk about this, or whatever it is. What needs to be said? Framing the event up front, because if I don't name it, it will be present in the room. So I think of them as release valves. What are the valves that if I turn them, it's like there'll be like a... What are the release valves that will just allow the compressed steam from whatever it is to just leave the room? So one example would be I did an Australian tour last year, and it's my first time working with this particular group and doing events with them. And so lots of people were coming who had never heard me before, and they had committed to spending a day with me. And a lot of people who are familiar with my work were bringing people who weren't familiar with my work. And so I would just go out, and one of my opening lines was, hi, I want to speak directly. One of the first things I say was, I want to speak directly to those of you who got dragged here by a friend. And you're like, what have I got myself into? And especially because it's an all-day event, you're like, what is going to go on here? And your friend, in order to sort of try to get you excited or to calm you down or to ease your tensions, was like, oh, it's going to be great. He's a former megachurch pastor from the Midwest in America. And then I would say, and your first thought was, well, now I really do believe in hell. Oh my word. That thing, I literally, by the end of the tour, I could feel the room by the end of that joke. Like, oh, okay, good. He gets it. He gets my suspicions coming into this. And I kept, literally, the number of people I noticed elbowing their friend when I said that. I could literally see people elbowing the friend like, he's talking to you, you came here dragging your feet, and he's let you know that he realizes the absurdity of this whole thing, or he realizes why you would have objections, and now you might even kind of like him, who knows? I remember doing a tour in the UK, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England in 2007. So it was the height of the Iraq War, and there was this bitter sentiment in England towards Tony Blair, and basically the idea that Tony Blair was sort of conned into fighting in the Iraq War by George W. Bush. And that was a very real sort of feeling in the air, like Americans dragged us into a war and our dude wasn't strong enough to say, no, I'm not doing that war with you, etc. But the anti-war sentiment was very high, and I was doing this tour called Calling All Peacemakers, and I would walk up front and just say, the first line was, hi, I'm Rob. I'm from America, where the wars come from. And like, I can't even tell you, it was like letting off an explosion in the room. Like the laughter and the like, oh, this guy understands what we're feeling. Just that one line. I didn't even have to say anything about war. Didn't even have to say anything about politics. Didn't have to say anything about President Bush, Prime Minister Blair. All I had to do is just that one line of joke was like, he's aware. And then we could move on. So think about, one question to ask is, what needs to be owned up front? So if you're doing a fundraising speech, if you're trying to convince people to give more money, if you're trying to grow the endowment, if you're trying to convince employees to take pay cuts and pitch in more hours, whatever it is, what needs to be owned and named up front so that it won't just be like a mosquito flying around the room that's annoying everybody, but no one has the guts to swat it. No one can be bothered. You name that is good communication. Or, I'm trying to think of another example. How about you have to give a talk about why so-and-so is being fired? Or so-and-so has been fired recently, and this is your first talk since they've been fired. And in the room is great. Well, there's fear, because people are like, well, that person can get fired. Can I get fired? There's anger, because people thought that person shouldn't have been fired. There is trepidation about the future. Where are we headed now? This destabilizes things. Whatever needs to be named, if you can eloquently, carefully, humbly name it. I realize that this has been a difficult 3 weeks. And I want to say up front, it's been difficult for me too. And obviously, we're going to be working through the departure of so-and-so, the loss of so-and-so, maybe there's been a death, through the tumultuous events. This has been a difficult time for me as well. And so I just want to say that up front. I hear you. I know some of us have disagreements exactly about the decisions that were made or about this. I get that, and we're going to be talking about that more one-on-one. This really isn't the forum for that, but I just want to say up front, I'm with you, and I'm up for walking through whatever we need to walk through together. Now, today we have a couple things we need to take care of, but I just wanted to say that up front because to not name it to me would not do justice to what we've all been through. Now, obviously, I'm just making stuff up. I mean, in this, right now, I'm just riffing, but you can see how just these little things, these little tweaks, they're almost like putting frames on a picture, can mean the world to people. It's almost like you just took some anxiety somebody was holding and you just took it out of their hands and you just gently placed it in a bucket in the front of the room, or you just set it on fire and let it float away, and now they're free to listen and maybe even go somewhere with you. So what are the release valves? What are the things that I need to say that will help free people from whatever they're carrying around so that they might actually listen? Oh, now, another thing on that, on the heels of that, what needs to be said that if I heard somebody say it from up front with a microphone, I would be so grateful and honored to be a part of this organization? This was, for years when I worked in a church, this was a question I would often ask the staff people. What do I need to, whatever the topic was or whatever the thing that was, the fly buzzing around the room, the thing that was present in the community. And there was a leader named Joe who was very, very insightful and wise. And he is the one who helped me sort of over time formulate this question when I would ask on a regular basis, which was, what is the thing that if I said it, you would say, that's why I work here? What is the thing that if I said it, you would say, that's why I'm proud to be a part of this place? What is the thing that needs to be said that requires the courage and the honesty and the vulnerability that you would say, that is what we're all about? So if you're giving a communication and you sense there's something going, ask the people you respect in the environment that you're in the space, or whoever's going to be there. Do you have a sense that there are a couple of things that need to be said that if they were said, everybody would go, oh, we're in good hands. Oh, we're going to be fine. Oh, yes, someone finally said it. Especially in organizations because of something called VROs. You know what VROs are, right? Vague. Oh, wait, VORs. VORs. It's something I made up. Vague, ominous rumblings. You know that thing that can build up in organizations where it's like, oh man, people are sending some emails. People aren't happy. A lot of controversy brewing. You know that thing that can brew up? People aren't happy about that recent decision. It's like these vague, ominous rumblings are swirling around the place, and good communicators name them. They step in and they say it. They say it. They say, this year has been really difficult for us. I don't know about you, but for me, this has been the most difficult year of our life together. I never thought we would have to face some of the things we faced. I still feel like I'm limping. But I also know that we're working through this, and that there are some things now that are coming out of this. Whatever it is you're going to say, you just say something like that, and here's why. Here's why. Sometimes when you're communicating, the reason why it feels like you're not getting through is that the people who are listening to you have a question, and until they get an answer to their question, they're not going to hear a word you say. And the question they have is, does he know what's going on? Does she know what's happening? And the moment you say, I'm aware of what these changes mean for many of you and your families, the moment you acknowledge awareness, oftentimes a whole bandwidth of people go, oh, okay. Because the terror is that you're up there talking and you don't know. And if you don't know what is the pressing thing in the room, then how are you ever going to have anything to say to them? And sometimes you don't even have to say anything more about it. Just demonstrating you're aware of what's in the room. Think about the room like a quantum energy field. What's in the room pinging and bouncing around? What's in the room that if it doesn't get addressed, it's the fly that's buzzing around that everybody is thinking about, and somebody is thinking, could somebody please swat the fly? And you swat the fly, and a whole thing now leaves the room. So questions to ask. What do I need to own? What do I need to name? What do I need to acknowledge? What release valves do I need to turn so that some compression and steam can be let out so that we can move on? What pain, transition, trauma, unexpected surprises and tragedies need to be spoken of in public clearly so that we can then move forward? And I'm telling you, the number of times I've interacted with communicators who were like, it was like I was throwing tennis balls against a brick wall. And then you just start asking a few questions and you're like, oh, you know why? It's because there was this whole thing and you didn't address it. You don't have to fix it sometimes. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to say anything wise or brilliant about it. Sometimes all you have to do is go, hey, look, elephant in the room, big elephant, and it's pooping all over everything. Now, let's turn to the book of Habakkuk. Oh, that's good. There's an elephant. Let's turn to Habakkuk. And then out of that, framing takes us into framing, release valves, and that takes us into structure and anticipation. Sometimes what's in the room is people don't actually know what's about to unfold. People have questions about structure. It's not about something that doesn't have anything to do with the talk. It's not about a death, a firing, a terrorist attack. It's not about something that is present in the system or in the space. It's a question about what actually is going to unfold now. Sometimes you have the type A's who, until they have a sense of overview and structure, they're going to have a base level of anxiety. And so the framing that some people need to know that they are in good hands is you just tell them, today I'm going to talk about this, and I want to tell you 2 stories. I want to show you a word. I want to show you some data, and I want to finish with 2 very practical applications. Boom. Every type A, organized achiever in the room goes, oh, because the dread, of course. Well, think about it. Sometimes, some settings, the people don't even know how long it's going to go. How do you feel if you find yourself in a situation where someone gets up to talk and you don't actually know how long they're going to talk? And then in the first 5 minutes, they don't seem really clear on where they're going. What immediately happens for you? You're like, what have I got myself into, right? How many times have you leaned over to somebody and been like, how long? And if the person leans back, I don't know. Think of how do you feel? But imagine the times when somebody got up and said, I'm so glad they gave me 33 minutes to talk about this. So here's what I want to talk about in 33 minutes. Boom, boom, boom. I want to tell you a story that happened to me, and I want to tell you how it changed things. I want to tell you how this truth can change things for you. Oh my goodness, 33 minutes, you're going to do this? I'm in. Do you see how that's a form of framing? And I actually do that. Sometimes I do these 2-day events. I'll actually do a whole joke on, now sometimes at events like this, there's a type A person in the front row with a notebook open and they've got a pen ready to go and they're like, okay, what's the structure? You're actually going to give us some stuff, right? And then I'll pause and look down at the people in the front row, and there's always somebody in the front row with a notebook open and a pen handy, ready to go. And everybody laughs and we just let them. And so I'll just say to them, there is a structure to this. And I might give them a moment on here's how the structure is going to unfold. I also, in the How to Be Here tour, which was these pop-up living rooms we did in clubs and dance halls around the world in 2016, it was a 7-hour experience I would take people on, but I would do the type A joke about the person in the front row. By the way, every single city, there was somebody in the front row with a notebook open, huge laugh. And then I would say, now, for those of you who are like, man, I just want to have a give and take and just sort of surf the wave together. And I'd say to them, oh, we're going to do that too, which is funny. All of it gives people some structure. So the question to ask on a talk is, how much structure will serve people well in this situation? How much structure? So at the beginning of this recording, I wanted you to know, hey, before I show you how this is arranged, a few thoughts. One for those of you who are new to communicating, one of you have been doing it for a while. And then I said, now I want to give you a list of questions. I did that so you'd be like, oh, the whole thing is about me writing down these questions until I have a massive list of questions who, when I'm working on a talk, I can refer to that list of questions and I can get unstuck and it'll help me. It's like a tool to help me make great speechifying. But yeah, just that bit of structure. Oh, we're going to get a long list of questions over an indeterminate number of hours going forward. Got it. But I've also been doing something interesting lately, which I really, really like. I'm actually going to do it tonight in the talk I'm giving, is I'll begin, and especially if I have some sort of screen where I can show them, and I will say, now, for those of you who need some structure, here's where we're headed tonight. And I will have a whole list come up of things that have nothing to do with anything. You know what? Here's a computer right here. Tonight, here's how I'm going to begin the talk. I'm going to say now, I'm so thrilled to be with you. And this is talking to these software developers and information architecture experts. I'm going to say now, to give you an idea where I'm headed, in case those of you need to know that there's a structure to this, I'm going to talk about tankless water heaters, ladders, scale and soul, a German word with no English equivalent, the Enuma Elish, 3 questions, a KFC near my house, a surfboard, 1 thought about cost, and a stack of books. That's it. That is this random list of words, which is actually the outline to my talk. Now, what's funny about that is I just let everybody know you're in good hands. We're going somewhere. And what's really funny is sometimes I will say, now, those of you who have seen that list, you're like, well, I guess I can leave now. There's no suspense left. But what's funny is what you're doing when you give them a whole list of things you're going to talk about. You've just given them your structure. You've just played your hand. You just showed them the reveal. But in doing that, what did you just do? You just created all kinds of mystery and anticipation. Tankless water heaters, the Enuma Elish, a stack of books. What? Hopefully, every person in the room is like, how? What? How is this all related to information architecture and software development? And by the way, if everybody's wondering, they're listening. Now, you can also do this visually. You can do this in materially. Let's say you're going to finish the story by telling a story about something. Let's say you're going to finish your talk with a story about something that happened. Let's think of something about something that happened in traffic involving an orange parking cone. And what if in your framing you say, so I'm going to talk about this, and at the end, I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me involving an orange parking cone, and there's an orange parking cone on the stage. Or you pull one out that was unseen and you put it there. Or you place it on the middle of the stage at the beginning before you start talking, and you don't mention anything. You just put it up there, and then you say, hi, I'm so glad to be with you. Tonight I want to talk about, and you don't even refer to it or mention it. What is every person in the room doing at that moment? Dude, what's the deal with the parking cone? Right? And at the very end, when you say, one more story to wrap this up. I was in my car, and we go, oh, nice. Do you see how framing can be about the front end, but framing can also be about the back end, and framing can also be about helping people understand they're in good hands, you're headed somewhere, it's somewhere unexpected, and there's a bit of lightness, and there's a bit of quirk to it, right? There's a bit of subversion to it. Tankless water heaters, the Enuma Elish, a surfboard, and a stack of books. Let's do this. You've also told every person in the room, and here's the thing, this matters to me and I've worked quite hard at it. Do you see what you're doing? Now, if you went up there and said, I've worked very hard on this talk, I hope you enjoy it. Oh, please. So heavy and plotting and like, ugh. But if you get up there, and hopefully tonight, like when I show that slide, they're like, oh, he's actually like knows where he's going and has done some work. Just letting people know that you're honoring their time. How many of you have heard a communicator who just keeps rambling and they don't even seem to know, we'll talk about that in a little bit, they don't even seem to know what this means or where it's landing. They're wasting your time. Like they're not honoring you. And that's, to me, I mean, the power of the live event is this person has put something together. Like hours have gone into this, and now they're going to take us somewhere, or they're going to create some space where something can happen. One of the ways that you honor people is by framing things in such a way that you show them you care, you love, you're committed, you've thought this through, and you want them to have the best possible experience. So, a question to ask is what will help this talk the most by being revealed up front. I want to tell you a story about something that happened to me at the grocery store recently involving celery. I just made that up. I can't wait to hear your story about celery. I'm already like, what, there's going to be a story about celery? Fantastic. I don't even care about celery, and I care about your story because somehow it matters to you, and you've told me we're headed somewhere, including a story about celery. My friend Kent just sent me his new book, Kent Dobson. It's called Bitten by a Camel. I literally see the title, and my first thought is, was he bitten by a camel? Like, really? Can you get bitten by it? Does it hurt? And so I'm already interested in the book simply because that'd be a weird thing to make up. And especially knowing that he spent a significant amount of time in the Middle East, Kent probably was bitten. I haven't heard the story yet. He probably was bitten by a camel, and he's going to tell you a story about bitten by a camel. I'm in, and that's just the title. So the question is, what are the things in the talk that you're about to give that you could tell them up front that would let them know they're in good hands and you're taking them somewhere? Or another question, how much do they need to know up front? But now, like if you say to them, and then at the end, I'm going to tell you a story about a girl in Peru because I want you to feel da-da-da-da, then you've just given away everything. Now I already know where it's going to land. So the question is, how much do I reveal and how much do I leave unrevealed? Hopefully, if you are familiar with my body of work, there are times when you're like, where is this going? I love it if you're asking that question because it means you're listening. But if too much of a communication, people are like, where is this going? That gets exhausting. So the master communicators are the ones who know when to create tension and then when to relieve the tension. So you think about a 30-second commercial. A 30-second commercials are master classes in how to create tension. Why is the boy carrying the fly swatter around? Why is the car going in reverse? Why is the dad in the back seat and the high school girl driving the car, right? Most commercials create a situation where you immediately wonder, why are things this way? Why is everybody's voice muted? Why is everybody talking in a weird language? Why are all the cars the same color? Whatever it is, most commercials, good commercials, are a master class in creating tension and questions that then get answered in the last second. And you go, oh. So if you watch your friends watching the commercial, watch the last 3 seconds in the commercial and watch their faces. It's the moment when the tension is relieved. It's the moment when the curtain is pulled back and you find out why this is the way it is. And one of the best questions you can ask is, how much do I tell them that will put the right kinds of ease in the room, that will relax people in the right ways? And how much do I leave hidden so that as the thing moves along, people are like, where's what? They stay with me to the end. Absolute. I mean, these questions. Okay, now, next, naming. There is a gift that you give people when you name things. How many of you have heard a communicator name something and you thought, yes, I felt that, but no one's ever named it. And once they named it, you were like, yes. And it was so helpful and maybe even comforting and healing. So to be honest, I will work for days and months on a phrase just to name something. I will bump into something in the course of preparing and realize, oh, well, what do I call that? Now, in a minute, we're going to get to something called existential urgency, which will put a more fine-tune this. But I will spend so much blood and sweat just asking the question, what do I name this? What is this called? Is there a phrase? Is there a sentence? Because if I could put language on that, I could better understand it. I wouldn't be knocked around by it. I wouldn't be so frustrated by it. I could tap into it all the more. I don't know what it is. An example would be, for probably a couple of years now, I have been working on the word holy. Because if I said to you, what does holy mean? And you said set apart, I'd say, well, so what does holy mean? So what does set apart mean? Or if I said to you, what does holy mean? So when someone says holy shit, what are they saying? Because if you said, well, it means it's of God. It's of God shit? What? Think about the word holy. It's so familiar that it's almost unfamiliar. So for a while now, I've been thinking, I would love to be able to explain what holy is and what holiness is in a way that would make sense in the modern world. So when the angels in the prophet Isaiah, holy, 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 the Hebrew word is kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. Why in the ancient tradition is holy repeated 3 times? See all these questions? Here's how a talk starts, is you just wonder, how would I explain holy to people who have no concept of the holy? Or, so then of course, now we have questions. Or do we already know holy, we just don't call that thing holy? And so what I need to do is show people experiences they're already having and saying, now in the ancient tradition, they had a word for that. They called that holy. See what I mean? Now, I was in the Redwoods early last year with Kristen and 2 of our kids, and we were in this redwood forest, and there was a docent in the forest, like a volunteer tour guide. And I was asking this guy all these questions because these redwoods were just unbelievable. You could literally go in the trunk of these trees. This is in Northern California. And I asked him, well, what's the tallest redwood in the world? And he said, the tallest tree in the world is on the border of California and Oregon. And I said, where? And he said, they won't tell you. Like, tree experts refuse to divulge the location of the tallest tree in the world because of the fear that somebody would ruin it. They'd deface it, graffiti it, chop it down, who knows? So the docent with the smile said, the tallest tree in the world, the experts who know where it is will not say where it is. And I remember thinking, that has something to do with holy, I think. This is actually, we'll talk about alchemy in a minute. Sometimes a talk just starts with 2 things that seem related, but you don't know why. So I've been sitting with this for a while, and gradually now, for the past couple of years, my holy talk, it's actually grown. It's now quite big. I feel like it's going to be the successor to my Everything is Spiritual, because now my what is holy has become like a whole giant idea that's now hours long. And the tree story now is in there, part of it. It's probably a couple years away from being ready to do. But yeah, it all started with trying to name it. So sometimes, and here's the really interesting thing, sometimes you are assigned to talk on something, or everybody's like, hey, talk on this, or you're invited to go talk on this, and you realize this topic is so ubiquitous, it's so common, it's so everywhere, and you ask a couple of friends, how would you define X? And when they define it, you realize this thing is so familiar, it's unfamiliar. Have you ever had that? Like, ask people to define love. It's shocking how many people, it's when you feel special towards somebody. Like, how many people, these giant, big, really familiar words, they can't give a coherent definition of it. Sometimes when people are like, we'll talk on this topic as if everybody knows what that is, sometimes what you have to do is back up and say, wait, do people even know what this is? Because if I charge in and give a talk on this, I might repeat the same old cliches and leave everybody in the dust at the end of an hour. We're all just as vague as we were. So maybe what I need to do is simply name this thing that everybody thinks they can name, but given a blank sheet of paper, no one can give an articulate naming of it. So the question is, when you're working on a talk, is there anything in this talk that needs to be named? Is there anything in this talk that we assume we know what we mean, but we actually could mean lots of different things? Is there anything in this talk that we would all assume we have the same thing in our heads when we use this word, but we may actually all have very different conceptions. And then sometimes the question simply is, do I just need to do a talk that defines something? Do I just need to define it? Would just defining it be enough of a gift? Well, now, see, you have something to work on. So now your radar is up, and as you live your life and as you think about whatever it is, like holy, you're in the Redwoods, and all of a sudden you hear a story, and you're like, I think that has something to do with holy. Yeah, see, you've turned your radar on, and now you're looking for ways to explain it with all of the scope and wideness of your life. And that, oh man, naming. I cannot stress how important that is. Now, next topic, good news. This question, I remember this was probably 2008, when all of a sudden this question leapt into my sight and started becoming a question I ask every single time I do anything. What is the good news here? That question alone, what is the good news here? Now, you may be talking about suicide. You may be talking about nerve gas. You may be talking about politics. You may be talking, who knows what you're talking about? What is the good news here? What is the good news here? A lot of times people haven't asked this question and they're communicating and they actually don't have good news. No wonder the thing didn't stick. No wonder you didn't get a particular kind of response. Obviously, coming out of the Jesus tradition, good news shapes every fiber of my being. But one sentence that helps me is there's got to be some. There's got to be some. When I'm working on something, there's got to be some good news here. I don't give up till I feel like I'm getting to some good news. Now, maybe you're telling everybody that you're shutting the company down and you're filing for bankruptcy and we're going Chapter 11. Even more, and here's the thing, here's the counterintuitive impulse. Whatever's happening, the more dark it is and the more it seems farther from good news, the more the good news will have power and balls and depth and strength. So at a funeral, when you use the word good news in the loss of somebody everybody loved, here's an example. Today we're grieving so-and-so. I want to talk about the good news. I've done this in a funeral, looking at the spouse of the person who died. The good news is that we are going to walk with you through this. We're going to walk with you through this because our hearts are breaking too. We can't imagine the heartbreak you are experiencing, the questions, the anguish, the loss. But our hearts are breaking too, and we want you to know we're with you. Now, you have to be careful how you use that. Sometimes this may not be stated explicitly. Sometimes you wouldn't say, you know what the good news is, because it would be inappropriate. Maybe even in the example I just gave, you wouldn't be like, you know the good news at this funeral. But nevertheless, what you are doing with your work and what you are communicating is good news. We are here in flesh and blood, and we're going to walk with you through this. Yeah, a number of changes are coming, and they're going to be very difficult. And the good news is we have each other. And so whatever's coming our way, we don't quite know, but we will weather this storm together. Now, let's get more refined with this. Finding the good news may involve naming how bad it is. So the good news may require some bad news. We may need, in this talk, to clearly, articulately name all of the ways that we've lost the plot. You may need to do a wake-up call. You may need to challenge or confront a group of people, a community, your employees, the community, whatever it is. And to do that, you might need to give some bad news. This has happened, we've got reports of this, here are the third quarter profit numbers. Sometimes the good news has to be earned. And the only way, it will be cheap if you say everything's going to be fine, and people are like, have you seen the third quarter numbers? We are hemorrhaging money. So sometimes if you just get up and go, I'll tell you what the good news is, everybody's like, this guy isn't living on planet Earth. Does this guy know? So sometimes the good news has to be earned. So, question to ask yourself: what's the bad news here? What's the good news here? And is this a situation in which, to get to the good news, the only way the good news will be legitimate and can be heard in its fullness and authenticity is if I'm willing to go all the way into the heart of the bad news? So you may need, some days you don't want to go to work. Some days you don't want to speak. Some days you have no good news and you're filled with despair. And sometimes in a communication, the proper thing to do is to tell them about your doubts and struggles. And sometimes you rip your heart open and you let them know how many times you've wanted to quit. You tell them the bad news. And then when you say, but you know what the good news is? I'm still here. And all the stuff, as we all know, that didn't kill me, I think it's made me stronger. Because now things that would have thrown me off don't throw me off like they used to. I feel like I've been all the way to the depths of the pit. And when I fell all the way to the bottom, I found myself thinking, well, what am I going to do now? I might as well throw myself into it. You see what I'm saying? Sometimes the question you ask is, where is the bad news in me? How have I blown it? How have I struggled? And as you go into the depths of that, that's where you find them. That's where you find the good news. It may feel cheap if you just say it. We've all heard people who are like, hey, everything's going to be fine. We're going to be great. And you're like, yeah, you don't want to be that person. And I did a whole podcast episode called Light, Heavy, Light. It was one of the earlier Robcasts about there is the lightness of being oblivious to how difficult it really is. Then you move into the heaviness of being aware of just how difficult, and we could all die tomorrow and the planet could blow up, right? There's a heaviness to life. There's suicide, there's addiction, there's betrayal, there's loss, there's abandonment, there's a heaviness. And then there's this thing that happens when you get all the way to the bottom of the heaviness is when you realize the whole thing may fall apart tomorrow. So we might as well enjoy today. We might as well take a shot at feeding some people and getting people drinking water and putting together some good talks. When you've suffered, if you take it all the way and you pursue it all the way to the bottom, what you discover is on the other side of heaviness is another kind of lightness. It's not the naive, clueless lightness, but it's a lightness of being that has been through the dark night of the soul. It's acknowledged and felt how fragile it all is. And the only conclusion was, but we're here and we're breathing. So we might as well enjoy today. When this began to happen to me with my work, joy became like a constant companion because all the things that could go wrong did. Yeah, all the things that could go wrong did. And when I kept going, I started to come out the other side. And all the things that would have crushed me, I realized, but I'm still here. So it started to lose its power. And then you find yourself in the lightness on the other side of heaviness. You find yourself in a good news, but it's a good news that earned it because it went through the bad news. It's a Sunday resurrection announcement, but it's because it went through Friday. You can't go around the death of Friday. You can't go around the absence of goodness. You can't go around the cross. You can't go around the suffering, the futility, the randomness, the pointlessness of life. You have to go all the way into the depths of the Friday. And if you go all the way into the depths of Friday and you stay there, eventually you'll get to Saturday and eventually Sunday may come. But then when you talk about good news and hope and when you talk about an open tomb, it's not the shallow, superficial, trite, hey, we're all going to be great. No, it's earned. And it means something, and it matters because you have been through the Friday. Oh my word, I get fired up about this. And then, one more in this section, naming, framing, release valves, good news, all that. one more, and this is called the Kahn question, K-A-H-N, Kahn. Louis Kahn, some people think he was the greatest American architect or one of the greatest architects ever. Louis Kahn lived early part of the 1900s, died in the 70s. And by the way, Louis Kahn, he had this whole essentially understanding of architecture, that architecture is building something out of materials. The word he used for material essence is light. So wood, glass, cement, stone, carpet, he called that light because light is essentially physicality. And then he talked about silence as that sense of awe and wonder that something produces in you. And so he said that a good space, a good building, is a space that produces that feeling in you. So it is something made out of light that produces silence. So he said that architecture is that which is between silence and light. Oh, come on. How great is that? So good. He said, so that's what a great building does, is it's a structure, light, materials, but that produces within you a sense of joy and wonder and awe. And by the way, he did some lectures in Brooklyn about this, and they were turned into a book called Between Silence and Light. And by the way, when you read that book, half the time you'll be thinking, is he talking about architecture? Is he talking about good communicating? Or is he talking about spirit and spirituality? It's so good. But anyway, he has a question he would ask on the front end of a design. He would say, what does this building want to be? What does this building want to be? When you're giving a talk, and this actually, of all these questions, this actually might be the most important question. I didn't think about it until now. What does this talk want to be? See, for many people, a communication and a talk is about trying to cram things into an outline. It's like you're just trying to pull things off the shelf or pull them out of a commentary or pull them off the internet. You know what I'm talking about? And like jam them into an outline and then walk up there with the outline and then spew it back to people. And so the energy is all about putting in, but flip it around energetically and think about a talk as, what is this talk and how do I simply pull out of it its true self? What does this want to be? So you can get mystical about this, and you can start a conversation with your talk. For some of you, that might unlock a whole new world. That might get you unstuck. What do you want to be? Because I feel like right now you're just a bunch of facts. But I feel like you want to be so much more about the heart. Or this talk is like two funny stories. That's all I got. And somehow the stories are related, and somehow I think the people I'm talking to, these stories will mean something. That's all I got. What do you want to be? Do you just want to be two really, really well-told stories with a couple of tiny threads that connect them, and then I give people space to interact and see what they see in those stories? What does this talk want to be? I remember the first tour I did was called Everything is Spiritual, and I had this custom whiteboard. It was 24 feet across, made for me, that had 6 panels, because I had this sense that this was like a big, like hour and a half, 2-hour talk, but more like a show. And I remember thinking, oh, I need to fill in the entire whiteboard. What does this talk want to be? And I remember thinking, oh, this talk wants to just be like a fire hose. It just wants to just explode. It needs to have like a certain crackling, vibrating energy where it's just boom, more, it just keeps coming at you. Sometimes when I talk, you're like, no, this talk needs to take its time, needs to have all this space. But I remember thinking, no, this talk is announcing what it wants to be, and it's just like, it just wants to get up and run around the room. Sometimes an image will come to mind of a talk, and you can't get the image out of your head. That's fine. That's fine. Get mystical about this. Invite the spirits in. Talk to the angels. Put on some good music. Too many communicators, I've observed, don't listen to the angels, to the spirits. They stay in their head. They stay in analysis. What are my 7 key insights? Lose the robot and embrace all that. Look up at the ceiling and say, seriously, drop out of the ceiling now and help me. I've seriously talked to talks. Like, I do not get you. What is this? What are you doing? Why are you so elusive? I have stuff I've been working on for so long that I've never released just because I don't feel like it's talked to me yet. I have things that are pages and pages and pages long, but I still don't feel like it knows what it wants to be. I've had things where I realized if I gave this right now, it would just be lots of thoughts. And then one tiny little insight. Actually, my book, How to Be Here, which came out in 2016, was just a whole series of stories and lessons that began with, I once had an idea of things I've made. I once had an idea for. So I had this hook. I once had an idea, and I had all these lessons that I'd learned about making things and about work. But I didn't have, and it's like, what does it want to be? Well, it just doesn't want to be just a bunch of stories and lessons. It's not a book of lessons. And then this other idea I had called How to Be Here was like 3 words attached to this title, How to Be Here. And suddenly I realized that one of those sentences was the thread for this entire other project. I never realized that if I combined the two, then I had something with a thread. And it was like, what does it want to be? What does it want? Oh, this is what it wants to be. No wonder. So you're working on it, but you're also watching it and listening to it and paying attention to it. So one of the questions you can ask not only is, what does this want to be, but what is it telling me about what it is? And I'm serious. You stop. You're on a run. You're at your desk. You're driving. You pause and you calm yourself. It's like a knot you're trying to untie. It's like a puzzle you're trying to solve. You're working on this talk and you just can't get it. Stop and ask, what is it telling me? What is it telling me? And think through why you're frustrated with it. It doesn't feel like it flows. It feels way too long. It feels jumbled. I don't feel like I've connected it with my own story. So I'm just giving them information, but there isn't a lot of transformation. Okay, great. Now it's starting to, what it's saying to you is it's saying to you, go deeper into your own story. Go deeper into your heart. Go deeper into your fears. Do you see what I mean? A talk may be saying to you, hey, the reason why you're stuck is because this taps into a fear, doubt, worry, insecurity. And if you actually go there, then you're going to end up giving a very different talk because you're going to have to deal with some stuff you haven't dealt with. Oh, you're right. See what I mean? Now we got a little flow. Now we're unplugged. Now we got something we can work on. Yeah, what does this talk want to be? So, naming, framing, release valve, structure, anticipation, gratitude. Just to review this whole section then, what are some things I should say up front? Who will be there? What are the questions, the tensions in the air? What are the apprehensions that may be in the room about me? How can I take the negatives and co-opt them and turn them into positives? Am I too young, too old, inexperienced? I'm not perhaps Oprah's target demographic. I should probably just own that up front. Own it with purity of heart. Enter into what you do know about where you'll be. Where will I be talking? What do I know about the audience? What do I know about the physical space? Enter into it. Pause and think about the space. Think about it physically, mentally, spiritually. What needs to be named? What needs to be framed? How do I let them know they're in good hands? And my friends, man, who knows what just those questions will pull out of you. Now, let's wrap up that section and let's move to the next section.